And welcome to another edition of Leadership Revealed. I'm really excited because in this episode, when you're listening to it on podcast or you're watching it on YouTube, I interview a chap called Peter Docker. Now, Peter has spent 25 years in the RAF. He spent a lot of time in the corporate world, and he is talking about leadership, but he's talking about handing over controls. And in it, we talk about his book, Leading from the Jumpseat, and how he has used that methodology and that sort of his thinking and his business approach. Now, this comes from a place of real life practice. This isn't theory. He hasn't had his head in the books. Peter talks about his RAF career and how there was a very, very serious sort of issue when he was in the backseat, when he was in control of a plane. And instead of just jumping in, he sort of let the pilot take control, and the pilot got them out of the little bit of an issue that they were in. And Peter's taken that methodology and that principle, and he talks about it in this podcast. So I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. He's a very, very clever guy, very articulate, and he's got some really, really fantastic theories about it, which I 100% concur with. So enjoy this edition of Leadership Revealed. Peter, thank you so much for joining us on Leadership Revealed. So how are you?
I'm fantastic. Thanks very much, John, for having me. Delighted to be here.
My pleasure, my pleasure. So for all the viewers and listeners out there, I've given a fantastic intro, but it's probably hasn't done you justice. Do you just want to give us a little bit of a background about you, your military career and where we are today?
Sure. I spent about 25 years in the Royal Air Force. I joined in my early 20s as a pilot. So I flew mainly large aircraft, passenger, but also air refueling aircraft, which give fuel away to fighter jets. And I did a lot of other jobs in the Air Force. I was a negotiator with the British government when the Berlin Wall came down with the Russians, which was one of those moments where I felt completely out of my depth. Many of those, by the way. I've negotiated on trade agreements with the State Department in the States. I've run multi-billion-dollar programs. I've taught at the Defense College on leadership and associated things. So the Air Force career was quite rich and full. But then when I left the Air Force in 2007, I joined a consultancy which was all about leadership, and spent about 3 years with them working with, mainly the oil and gas and construction industry. And then after that, I sat down and started to write down my own ideas about leadership. And it's during that time that I picked up with Simon Sinek, and some listeners may have heard of his name. He's written lots of best-selling books, and I worked with Simon for about 7 or 8 years, helping take his message around the world. So the last decade has really been about traveling the world, which has been a great privilege, meeting lots of different people, working with leadership teams from some of the biggest companies in the world, acting as a speaker on the stage, and also consultant and coach. So it's been a very full life up to now.
So I think before we were talking offline, you said you've been in 92 countries with your training and your coaching.
Yeah, and in a week or so time, that will be 93, because I'll be off to Jamaica, where I haven't been before, so that will be good, and a few more countries to go. And just on that, it's not about just dashing around the planet. What it's taught me, John, is that we've got a lot of things that separate us in this world, between countries, nations, cultures, whatever.
Yeah.
There's so much more that is common between us, and I think that's what I've learned most, traveling the world and meeting people, is that what brings us together is so much more than what keeps us apart, and that gives me great hope for the future too.
Brilliant. I like one of your quotes is your whole sort of theories about building people up to be extraordinary at what they do. Is that your theory on leadership? Well,
it's part of it. I get quite emotional, frankly, when I see people excelling. And by excelling, I'm talking about things that bring them joy because they feel they've achieved. It doesn't matter whether I know them or not. It just really deeply affects me. And that is because I think that we all have something inside us that we're here to bring to life on this planet during our time, and it's a case of discovering what that is. and bringing that to life. So whenever I'm spending time with people and helping them on that journey, whether it's leading, a very big company, or someone just as a solo entrepreneur, building their own business, or anything in between, or being a parent. Parenting is one of the toughest leadership jobs that the majority of us, or many of us, will face. It is a big challenge. And when we see our kids grow up and start to thrive, then that fills our heart with warmth, because we're seeing them be extraordinary in their own way. So, yeah, it is a theme that goes through what I talk about and how I work with people, and putting that into practice so we can unlock that at scale as well as at an individual level.
I quite like your sort of ideas on adaptive leadership. So it is all about letting go and letting people thrive and flourish, and not being a control freak. Well,
yes. I mean, adaptive leadership was first put together by Ronald Heifetz of Harvard Business School. And I've picked up on that theme in my latest book, Leading from the Jumpseat, because Leading from the Jumpseat is all about creating a space into which others can step and lifting them up so as they can lead. It's not, as I see it, Leading from the Jumpseat is the highest form of leadership, because it's not about increasing or retaining your own power. It's about empowering others. And the reason that's so important is that when we're at work at something that really matters to us, and John, you're an entrepreneur, you've got businesses that you've put your heart and soul in, so it's important to you. And if you want that to continue, and why wouldn't you, then we need to give people the opportunity to step up and lead, because at some stage, we all take a step back ourselves. You'll retire as a CEO, people will move on as team leaders, or going back to the parenting example, our kids will eventually grow up and start to lead our own lives. So we all eventually take a step back. And Leading from the Jumpseat is about leading intentionally such that we prepare people to take forward those things that are really important to us. Why wouldn't we want to do that, And in the process, we draw in things such as adaptive leadership, which is really important. One of the aspects of that, I call it harnessing the collective genius of our team. Because one of the greatest challenges, I think, for someone who chooses to lead a team is that in order to accelerate our progress, we need to be able to let go of having to always be the one with the answer. Yeah. If we limit our progress based on what we know as the leader, then we become the bottleneck.
Yeah.
But there's an opportunity to become adept at leading when we don't know the answer. And instead, we are focused on just maintaining the context where people on our team can come together using their individual skills and expertise to figure out the answer, to learn our way through to that solution. And that way, we're not the bottleneck, and our team and our performance starts to accelerate. So it's all part of this Leading from the Jumpseat, but it starts with us being willing to take that step back and lifting others up.
I like that, because that's what I sort of practice and preach in our business. I've got an amazing MD. She's got area managers. I don't want to, if I'm the cleverest person in the room, I'm in the wrong room. You definitely don't want to be in that position. But I think a lot of leaders, especially small business owners, think that their answer has to be the right one. There's nothing wrong with, you can still be a leader, but still get the answers from people who work with you.
Absolutely. And this transition, as I call it, though, is not trivial. Yeah. It's really difficult, because if we think about it, during our life, when we're at school and then college, we start to specialize in the stuff that we enjoy, hopefully, or become good at. And then when we went to the workplace, we're hired because of our skills and expertise. If we're really good at it, we get promoted. And so it goes on until we get to that position where we're no longer the person on the tools or the computer programmer or whatever happens to be. We are the manager taking care of those people. And quite often there is not much training or support as to make that transition. I remember making that transition in the Royal Air Force, where I went from being a wing commander running a squadron where I was still a pilot, to being a group captain where I had a team. I was running this international procurement project, about 13 billion pounds. It was a biggie. And there were so many people on my team, legal experts, engineering experts, flying experts, industry experts, and they had all this knowledge that I did not have. And so my job was not to know the answer. My job was to ask the appropriate questions, the good questions, and then to be able to absorb the information that came my way, package it and present it to whomever needed to know. But that was a significant transition. But fortunately, the training and experience I had in the Air Force had prepared me a little for that. But often in business, we don't prepare people for that. And it comes as a big shock because we're used to being the person who knows the answer. And it feels very uncomfortable at first, not knowing the answer, and instead refocusing our attention on asking the good questions and eliciting the answer from our team. And yeah, it's a big transition.
One of the issues we used to have fair few years ago as we were growing was we had people who were managing properties, portfolio managers. Then all of a sudden, if somebody showed a lot of promise, they were promoted to manager. So on the Friday, they were managing properties, and then on the Monday, they were managing people. And that transition was incredibly difficult until we said, right, well, we need to have a training program, 6 months or a year, a management training program where we can prepare these people, because if we put them in that position with lack of training, it's on us. If we put that in lack of support, if we put them in that position and we give them the training, the nurture, the support, and they didn't work out, then at least we did everything we could. But you've got to try and do everything you can to make that transition as easily as possible.
Yeah, and you know what? There's a great aid to that, which I've used in workshops before, and also I've written about in the book. And that aid comes from Hollywood. And it's the 1995 film Apollo 13.
Oh, right.
With Tom Hanks in. And also the character that I focus on is played by Ed Harris, and that character is Gene Kranz. And for those who don't recall, the Apollo 13 film, but also it's true events, very true events. The Apollo space missions that in the 70s were taking astronauts to the moon is all going swimmingly well. But then the Apollo 13 mission was one where they had an explosion on the spacecraft en route to the moon. And the film plays out beautifully, and it is very accurate rendition of what actually happened. It plays out beautifully how a team was suddenly faced with a completely unknown situation. And they had to refocus from the original mission, which was getting 3 astronauts to the moon and 2 of them onto the surface and back again to Earth. They had to go from that to just being focused on how the heck are we going to save these 3 astronauts and get them home safely. And Gene Kranz at the time was the mission controller at NASA. He was 32 years old, who was a former US Air Force pilot. And he portrays, and the film portrays, how to lead a team when you don't know the answer. And it does it beautifully. And, well, there's something that comes up for me in that film is the notion that really there's only 2 things in this world, John. There's only 2. There's content and there's context. Content is the stuff that we'll work on, but context is what gives it meaning. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. Yeah, we have all those puzzle pieces on the table. That's our content, right? But then it's only when we can see the picture on the box that those puzzle pieces make sense. And when we're leading, particularly in an unknown situation that goes beyond our own experience, we need to be focused on making that picture on the box as clear and as vibrant as possible. Because then our people can bring those jigsaw puzzle pieces together, figure it out themselves. And what actually Gene Kranz did effectively when the Apollo 13 crisis hit, he turned over those puzzle pieces to discover a different picture on the other side. That different picture was, let's just get these 3 astronauts home safe. Yeah. And he painted that picture very, very clear. You know, it was a Hollywood line, but we've never lost an American in space yet. It's not going to happen in my watch. Failure is not an option. That was a Hollywood line, but the real Gene Kranz adopted that line for his book a few years later, because it just captured their attitude. And Gene Kranz focused all the time, that picture on the box, and it was his people, his engineers, his technicians, who learnt their way through to the solution to get those guys home safe. But that would not have happened if Gene Kranz did not have that picture on the box and make it really crystal clear, keeping that context really present for people. Yeah, so that's the transition that we need to go through, I think, linking back to your example of managing or going from selling houses, in effect, to managing the people who sell those houses. Bit different, one may say, from rescuing astronauts from a spacecraft, but actually the principles are still the same. And so, dig out Apollo 13 and watch it through that lens and see the leadership in action. It's really pretty cool.
I'll definitely be getting that on Netflix or Prime.
Well, there you go.
How would you suggest to our watchers, viewers, and listeners that this sounds really great? They've all bought into it. They want a business that somebody else can run, or they want a business where they can build up leaders. How do they go about doing that? Because the issues are normally, if you've run a small business, you've got that control freak mentality, that sort of psyche where I can't let go. And what happens if you've just got this gut feeling, or you know that some of your current staff are not good enough to be able to let go too? How would you say, what is the first sort of steps that they can take?
Well, actually, as with a lot of these things, John, it starts right here in the mirror, getting really clear on what you stand for and what drives you. Things seem to come in twos for me, and here is another pairing. A stand is different from a position. A position is against something. A stand is for something. We've got narrow lanes around where we live in the countryside in the Cotswolds, and there's one just out of the village here where there's only enough width for one car to pass at a time. And sometimes you get 2 cars opposing directions, stopping head on. And quite often, the 2 drivers can take up a position against the other driver, and that position will look like, you move over, I've got priority here. My journey is more important than yours. You were going too fast, so you give way. And their position against one another becomes more and more entrenched. But occasionally, one of those drivers has got a stand for being courteous on the road. And they immediately reverse back up to a passing place, which means that the other guy can carry on his journey, and that other guy's position just dissolves. Because that's the thing with a position, it can only exist with a counter position. But the guy's stand for being courteous on the road, that will continue to thrive regardless if anybody else is involved or not. And taking that to business, what do we stand for in our business? Not what are we against, no, what do we stand for? And what drives us? We can talk more about drivers in a minute, but it's so important to get really clear on what we stand for. And there can be a number of things, and turn that into a commitment to prevail and move forward. The reason it's so important is because people on our team will look to us for the clues and direction. And when we're very clear on what we stand for, it gives them the signposting that they need to see how they can contribute. And it will attract people who also are inspired by what you stand for. And they will then be the right sort of people on your team who will start to show the potential to perhaps lead your team or step up as leaders. But it all starts on being very clear on what you stand for.
Yeah. I think trusting your team as well is a massive thing. Again, there's a lot of small business owners don't want to hand over because they know that person might not have all the answers. But I always say to my guys, if you've got kids, the first time your child rode a bike without the stabilizers, when they fall off, you didn't kick them out the way and say, come on, I'll show you how to do it. You let them have a go because you knew they were going to fail. You knew they were going to fall off.
Well, that links to the opening story of the book, you know, where the title comes from, leading from the jump seats. The jump seat on a large passenger jet is the seat that's immediately behind the two pilots, you know, captain, co-pilot, first officer, and you have this third seat, which is often empty. But crew members catching a ride home can sit on it, that sort of thing. And this goes back some years, and I just qualified a brand new captain. He'd been a first officer, a co-pilot for many years, very good pilot, and he just finished his training to become a captain. I'd signed him off. We just landed at San Francisco Airport, which is a very busy airport. I'd signed him off. We stopped there the night, and then I said, look, I'll be down the back for the trip home. You'll have a regular first officer with you. You know, good on you. Well done. And it was a great moment. But the following morning, he came to me and he asked me if I'd come and sit on that jump seat. Not because he was underconfident, but because it was a very busy airfield, busy airport with lots of departing traffic. And we didn't go there very often. And he just wanted an extra pair of eyes to check that we taxied the right way or watch out for other traffic. It was a sensible decision, you know, use somebody else who's available to keep the aircraft safe. So I strapped into that jump seat and we taxied out, and finally it was our turn to get airborne to take off. And we got airborne around about 300 feet, which is very close to the ground, really. We had an emergency. And what I then chose to do in probably the next 1 or 2 seconds would dictate whether the 140 people on board would survive or not. So, well, the punchline to that is I chose to do nothing. I just sat with my hands in my lap, quite calm, because I'd signed him off the previous day as qualified to fly anywhere in the world and having accountability for the safety of that aircraft and everybody on board. So why would I intervene? What he needed in that moment was to sense that I had his back. And we can all sense that. We don't have to look at somebody, we can feel it. In that moment, I needed not to be a great leader, I needed to be a great follower. Yeah. And with Callum feeling that I had his back, he was able to do what he needed to do. And, you know, I'm here to tell the tale. And he did a great job. So, you know, in the business world, this is the equivalent of perhaps someone who's just got their spurs as a sales manager going for their first big deal. It's a really important deal. You know, we could be on their shoulder going with them, or we could say, look, hey, here's the pen that I used to sign my first big deal. I want you to use this today. Let me know how it goes.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
You know, and if we've done our job to train that person, to lift them up, to build the relationship like I had with Callum, yeah, where we knew that we got each other's back, then that person is as equipped as they need to be to go and close that deal or fly that aeroplane. Yeah. So it's the trust comes from the relationship we have with the person, and also the amount of time and investment we've made in their training and preparing them, lifting them up. That's what it means to lift them up, you know? It's no use just saying to someone who's just walked in off the street, yeah, you go and close that deal. No, they need to build a relationship with the business, what you stand for as an organization, so as they can appropriately represent us to the outside world, and also the skills they need to do their particular job. That's what lifting up is.
You talk about responsibility and accountability and the difference. Does that come a lot into leadership, and how does that define and help you become a better leader?
Totally. And I think, you know, there's quite a few distinctions in language I use, which you might not find in a dictionary, but over the years I picked these up, and it certainly helped me. And responsibility, accountability is one distinction. You know, there's accountability can be given. So, you know, as CEO, you give accountability to your managing director for certain things. Yeah. And it's probably in their contracts. key performance indicators or whatever. But if that's all you got, it's probably not going to help you perform brilliantly as an individual or as a team. People need to choose to take responsibility. And that's only something we can choose to take on. We can't be told. It's when we choose to take ownership, is another word. Again, parenting gives a great example. Years ago, when our kids were small, we lived on a little close of houses. It wasn't very busy. And our two kids would play out on the street with the neighbors' kids. And, we had accountability as their parents for their safety. And so if we saw a car or a stranger coming around, we would go out and look after our own kids. But also, we felt a responsibility for our neighbors' kids. And so we'd take care of them too. And so as a neighborhood, we thrive because everybody looked after everybody else. And so it is in the business. You can tell people until you're blue in the face, you're accountable to deliver this at such and such point, such and such time. But unless they feel a responsibility, a drive to deliver, then it's going to be a real uphill struggle all of the time, both for you and probably for them. So creating an environment where people choose to take responsibility is, I think, key. And it fits into one of the buckets I talk about in the book Lean from the Jumpseat, and that is a role of a leader is to create or nurture a sense of belonging. Because when people feel that they belong, then one of the many things that happens is that they're much more likely to step up and choose to take responsibility for their actions and for the work they do.
Is there anything else in the book that you can share with us about how to become a better leader, or make a better company? You being a leader at the head of that. Sure.
I mentioned one of the buckets, I call them, the nurturing a sense of belonging. The book is broken into three sections, if you like: commitment, humble confidence, and belonging. And the belonging I've already mentioned. There's more to it than just nurturing that sense. It's responsibility comes into that section as well. We've talked a little bit about commitment, and I'll talk a little bit now about humble confidence, perhaps, and what that means, because that goes to the heart of what it takes to be able to be the leader that lifts others up. And it links to, well, another pairing as well in language, which is this: everything that's important to us in life, everything at a personal level, is driven by one of two things. It's driven by either fear or love. Now, whenever I mention the love word in a business context, people go, whoa, hang on. Yeah, that's because, love means a lot of different things. So let me clarify that. First of all, on the fear side, what drives us? When we're driven by fear, fear is a natural reaction in ourselves when our life is threatened, which fortunately isn't very often. But it's also a driver when we feel our livelihood, status, or reputation is threatened. And when those kick in, we have the fear, fight, or flight reaction to it. And what that can look like in the business world is, ego comes to the fore. Ego is Greek for I. It's all about me. We shut down from other people. It's about our own survival. That's the survival instinct. We tend to see the world as a place of scarcity, and competition. We must prevail, regardless of others. Anger sometimes can come out. All these things are fear drivers. But then we have a choice, and that is to choose to be driven by love drivers. And when we're driven by love, what that looks like is we think about others. We think about people on our team. We think about the customers we serve. It's not about me, We have a view of the world which is one of opportunity and possibility instead of scarcity. Importantly, we have humility and what I call humble confidence. And humble confidence is like the antidote to ego. Humble confidence has us be thinking about the bigger picture, not just about me. it has us willing to listen to those on our team, just as Gene Kranz does in the film Apollo 13. Yeah. Because unless we're willing to listen, we're not going to hear the great input from our people. Unless they feel they can show up and share their thoughts with us, then we're not going to hear them. And if we're full of ego, of fear, then people are likely to clam up. If we have humble confidence, we are willing to listen. Other people sense that. But the confidence aspect of humble confidence is that we're willing to make a decision when the time comes. Even if we haven't got the full big picture, we need to make a decision. So that's the humble confidence aspect of it. But because it needs us to let go of fear, which takes courage, we need to be very clear on the reason we're doing that. And that's where that commitment piece that goes before comes in. Because when we're in situations where we don't know the answer, where it's unknown territory, then what guides us is what we stand for, what we believe in, and the commitment that we have. And that gives us the bedrock, the foundation we need to have humble confidence and to be willing to let others in so as we can learn our way through to the answer. And as I say, that only happens when people feel they belong on our team. And that only happens when we genuinely care about people. Yeah.
I suppose this happens in all sorts of leadership roles. I mean, we were speaking off camera about a good friend of yours who was leading SEAL Team 6.
Yeah.
That sort of thing comes into even his job, which is extreme of the extreme.
Yeah. Well, Rich Davini, great guy, is American. As you mentioned, he ran SEAL Team 6. He spent about 20 years, I think, the US Navy SEALs, which is a pretty elite special forces group of people. And SEAL Team 6, there are a number of SEAL teams, but he led SEAL Team 6, which was the best of the best of the best of the best, Wonderful guy. And what I think comes perhaps as a surprise to people who aren't familiar with the military is, although the military ultimately is there to take violent action, ultimately, in the case of defending the nation, it doesn't happen unless the people who are leading really care for their troops, their people. And I know Rich Davini would agree with this too. And certainly it was my experience leading a couple hundred people during the Iraq War in 2003. I deeply cared for my people. I knew them very well. I knew their families in many cases. And my job was to enable them to do their work. And we flew big unarmed air refueling aircraft, undefended. And, we flew around in circles, giving fuel away to fighter jets, and often get shot at from the ground. And I cared for my people, not just the ones flying the aircraft, but the engineers who are maintaining them, and spent time with them and listened to them, And so even in the most extreme environments, teams will only perform, in my view, when they know that the person at the top of the tree really cares for them. Doesn't mean that you're soft necessarily. It just means that you think of their interests too. And even in those extreme environments where people are putting their lives on the line, they do so because, first of all, they're very clear on the shared commitment that we have. If they're going to succeed facing the unknown, they'll have humble confidence to listen to the input from other team members, but also they have this shared sense of belonging as well. They're a part of a team, and they don't want to let that team down. They want to step up, take responsibility to figure it out so as we prevail. And that's what has the military traditionally prevail, whether it's in a war situation, or indeed a humanitarian relief situation, or peacekeeping, all these situations which are highly complex, where you're stepping into the unknown. It works more often than not because people feel they belong, they have a shared commitment and belief, and those involved have got humble confidence and willing to listen as they learn their way through to the answers that we need to find.
I think one of the things that gets overlooked is in leadership is a lot of people think leadership's very American, a very wishy-washy, but you've actually used these techniques in real life combat situations and have come out very successful. So it's not just theory, this stuff really works.
Oh, absolutely. And it works in business too. The reason that I mentioned the military side is because, you know, it's not the warm and fuzzy. It is what has people choose to do remarkable things. And also, by the way, it works in aircraft emergency situations. You know, the flight deck of a large passenger jet is, for me, a microcosm of leadership. And I've seen some great leadership and some very poor leadership. And when you get it right on a flight deck of an aeroplane, it works very, very well indeed. And there's several examples in the book, such as when I was faced with crash landing an aircraft with 140 people on board. The things that you learn about leadership in those situations, in the extreme moments when it really, really, really matters because your life is on the line, those lessons, those approaches can be used just as successfully in everyday business, because at the end of the day, it's all about human beings and how we interact with one another.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. Peter, it's been absolutely amazing listening to you. I just want to say thank you very much for your service over 25 years. Really appreciate what you've done. Leading from the Jumpseat, I've already ordered it. You can order it pre-Amazon on Amazon. Brilliant.
Yeah, we'll send a link for your show notes, but yes, it's available for pre-order on Amazon wherever you are in the world, pretty much, but also Waterstones, the UK, Blackwell's, and all the usual places. 19th of October. And also, if people want to come along, there's the live book launch on the 19th of October at Pembroke College, University of Oxford. It's worth going just to see Pembroke College, to be honest. Where I'll be giving a short talk, and there'll be books people can buy. I'll sign them and answer Q&A too. So I'll send you the link for the show notes, John, for that event as well. People can book on Eventbrite.
And you also do workshops and keynote talks and all sorts of.
Absolutely. So I speak all over the world. I'm off to Jamaica in, how long? About 10 days or so. And all over the world, and run workshops and programs for companies. If people want to learn more, just drop me a line through the website.
Excellent. We'll put all the links in the show notes below. But Peter, once again, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. And thanks again for joining us on Leadership Revealed.
Pleasure's all mine. Thank you, John.